a former Navy SEAL specializing in K-9 who has buried his past and vowed never to protect anyone again. A young woman is on the run in a blizzard, carrying a secret that could cost her her life. They meet by chance on an icy mountain road, just as armed men begin to approach. Only snow, fear, and a choice neither is ready to make. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe for more. The storm arrived without warning, turning the northern mountain road into a white corridor of wind and silence, where snow erased direction and time, and every sound felt swallowed before it could finish breathing. Jack Turner drove slowly, both hands steady on the steering wheel of his aging pickup, his eyes scanning the road with the trained calm of a man who had learned that survival depended on noticing what others missed. He was 36, tall and broad-shouldered, with a lean, disciplined build that spoke of years in special operations. His beard was short and uneven, more habit than style, flecked with early gray that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with memory. His eyes, dark, watchful, perpetually alert, had the distant look of someone who never truly left the battlefield. He no longer wore a uniform, but the posture of a Navy SEAL K-9 handler never faded. Losing his last K-9 partner on deployment had carved something hollow inside him, leaving him withdrawn, precise, and emotionally guarded, especially around anything that breathed and trusted him. He was almost past the wooden bridge when something in the snow pattern made him slow. Not movement, absence, a disturbance where the wind should have smoothed everything flat. Jack eased the truck to a stop and killed the engine. The sudden quiet rang louder than gunfire. Beneath the bridge, half hidden by drifting snow, was a figure curled inward, human-shaped, too still to be safe. Jack stepped out into the storm, boots crunching softly, his breath fogging the air. Under the bridge he saw her clearly. A young woman crouched low, arms wrapped tightly around something small and trembling. She was slim and slightly tall, maybe 5'7", with narrow shoulders hunched against the cold. Her dark brown hair, tied once and now half fallen, clung damply to her pale face. Her skin had the grayish tone of someone losing heat too quickly, freckles standing out starkly across her nose. Her eyes, wide, hazel, and frantic, flicked between Jack and the tree line, as if expecting something to emerge at any second. The bundle in her arms shifted, and Jack saw the puppy. A German shepherd, no more than 3 months old, black and tan fur fluffed up uselessly against the cold. Its ears were still soft, not yet standing, its paws oversized and clumsy, trembling with exhaustion rather than fear. One hind leg was streaked with blood where the ice had scraped skin raw. The puppy didn't bark, it didn't whine. It simply pressed closer to the woman's chest, breathing in shallow, uneven pulls, as if instinct already knew that silence meant survival. "Please," the woman said, her voice hoarse, barely louder than the wind. "I can't go back. I can't." Her name, she would tell him later, was Sarah Miller, 27, a local woman, not hardened by wilderness, but not fragile either. Her posture spoke of someone used to carrying responsibility quietly, someone who endured more than she complained about. Right now, though, fear had stripped her to the bone. She shook uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from the certainty that whatever she was running from felt closer than safety. Jack crouched slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, non-threatening. He had learned long ago that panic responded poorly to urgency. "You're freezing," he said evenly. "Both of you." Sarah tightened her grip on the puppy, her knuckles whitening. "They're looking for me," she whispered. "If I go home, they'll find me. I swear I didn't do anything wrong." Her gaze darted again toward the forest, and Jack followed it. There, faint, half buried by fresh snow, were footprints that didn't belong to her. Larger boots, purposeful spacing. Someone had tried to erase tire tracks nearby, dragging branches across the road. This wasn't an accident. Jack felt the old switch flip inside his chest, the one that separated civilians from threats, noise from intent. He noted the angle of the bridge, the way the wind carried sound, the limited visibility. Whoever was searching would have trouble hearing them here, but not for long. Sarah's breathing hitched as a gust cut through her coat. "I found something," she said, words tumbling out now. "I wasn't supposed to see it. I copied files for my boss, just backups. Then a man died. They said it was a crash, but it wasn't. I know it wasn't." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't ask for details. Not yet. Information was weight, and she was already carrying too much. He studied her more closely, the raw red of her hands, the way her lips were beginning to blue. Hypothermia was setting in. The puppy shifted again, licking weakly at her wrist. Something about that small, stubborn movement hit Jack harder than he expected. It echoed a memory he kept buried. Another dog, heavier, stronger, bleeding out under desert stars while Jack's hands shook for the first time in his career. "I'm Jack," he said quietly. "You can't stay here." Sarah hesitated, torn between fear of the cold and fear of pursuit. "I don't have anywhere else," she said. Jack glanced once more toward the forest. The storm was worsening, but storms were honest. People weren't. "You stay, you die," he said simply. "You move with me, you might live." It wasn't comfort. It was truth, and something in his tone made her believe him. He pulled his heavy jacket open, wrapping part of it around the puppy first, shielding the small body against his chest before Sarah could protest. "Buddy," that was the name she whispered with a shaky smile, let out a tiny sound, then stilled, warmth finally reaching him. Jack felt the heat seep through the fabric, felt the tremor of life refusing to quit. He swallowed hard, forcing his breathing to stay steady. Attachment was dangerous. He knew that, and yet his hands adjusted instinctively, careful, practiced. Jack helped Sarah to her feet, noticing the way she favored one ankle, likely twisted earlier in her flight. She was lighter than she looked, exhaustion hollowing her strength. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Her courage wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed, thin and stubborn, like a thread that refused to snap. Jack respected that kind of strength. It reminded him uncomfortably of who he used to be before loss taught him silence. They moved away from the bridge, not toward the road, but down and around it, where the terrain dipped and the wind scoured tracks into nothing. Jack chose the path without explaining, instincts guiding him. Sarah stumbled once, and Jack caught her elbow, steady but impersonal. The puppy's breathing grew more regular against his chest. Snow erased their footprints almost as soon as they formed them, and for the first time since he'd left the service, Jack felt that old clarity settle over him, the sense of purpose sharpened by immediate danger. Behind them, somewhere beyond the curtain of white, an engine revved briefly before cutting out. Sarah flinched. Jack didn't. He listened, counted seconds, measured distance. Whoever was out there hadn't seen them yet. But time was thin. Jack tightened his grip on Buddy and angled them toward the darker line of trees ahead, where sound would scatter and sight would fail. He didn't look back. Looking back was how you froze. As the storm swallowed the bridge and the road alike, Jack Turner made a decision he hadn't planned for and hadn't wanted. He would get the girl and the puppy out of the cold. Whatever followed after that, men, guns, consequences, he would face it when it came. For now there was only movement, breath, and the fragile weight of two lives trusting him to lead them somewhere safer than where they'd begun. They moved deeper into the low ground where the wind thinned and the snow lost its voice, Jack leading with the quiet certainty of a man who had learned to let terrain do the talking. The storm pressed down like a lid, and the world narrowed to breath, footfall, and the fragile heat he guarded against his chest. Sarah walked with a careful, uneven rhythm, favoring her left ankle, jaw clenched against pain she refused to name. Up close, Jack saw the steadiness beneath her fear. She was tall and slender, with long limbs that moved efficiently when panic didn't interfere. Her hair, a dark chestnut, had come loose from its tie and fell in damp strands around a face that looked younger than its eyes. Those eyes, hazel, alert, quick to calculate, belonged to someone used to keeping secrets in quiet rooms. Her skin was pale with cold now, but beneath it Jack sensed resilience, the kind grown from long hours and little praise. They reached a shallow cut in the land where spruce branches formed a rough ceiling, and Jack paused, listening. Snow whispered through needles. Nothing else moved. He set Buddy down briefly, keeping one gloved hand cupped around the puppy's rib cage. Buddy's fur was still fluffed with frost, his ears soft and folded, his breath uneven but stronger than before. The pup's eyes, dark, wet, trusting, tracked Jack's face as if committing it to memory. Jack looked away, annoyed at the ache that rose without permission. "Tell me what you found," Jack said, low and controlled. He didn't rush her. Rushed truths broke. Sarah swallowed, hugging herself for warmth. "I do books," she began. "Seasonal, invoices, reconciliations. I work nights because it's quiet." She let out a thin breath. "My supervisor asked me to back up a server after hours, just in case," he said. "I copied everything to an encrypted drive. When I checked it later—" She stopped, eyes flicking to the trees, then back to Jack. "There were transfers that didn't make sense, shell accounts, fuel purchases that never reached depots, and a payment tied to a crash report." Jack didn't interrupt. He crouched, testing the snow with a boot, mapping options. Sarah continued. "The driver in that crash, Tom Reyes, was supposed to be home by midnight. Instead, his truck went off the pass. They said ice, but the timestamps didn't match. Neither did the money." Her voice steadied as facts replaced fear. "I asked questions. The next day, Tom was dead, and my supervisor told me to forget the files existed." A name surfaced for Jack. Tom Reyes, mid-40s, known on the route. He remembered the incident in passing. No charges, no headlines. Accidents happened in winter. They were convenient. "You kept a copy," Jack said. Sarah nodded once. "I didn't mean to. Habit. Redundancy." A bitter half-smile. "Then a car sat outside my place for 2 nights. Engine running. No plates." She hugged herself again. "I took Buddy and left." "Buddy?" Jack asked, glancing down. The puppy lifted his head at the sound of his name. Sarah's expression softened despite everything. "I found him behind the depot a few days ago. Someone dumped a litter. He was the smallest. He followed me home." She rubbed her thumb over a healing scratch on her wrist. "I was going to take him to a shelter. Then this happened." Her gaze hardened. "I couldn't leave him." Jack weighed the information the way he weighed distance, by consequence. A witness with an encrypted drive was leverage. A storm was cover. Men who erased trails knew how to hunt. "Where's the drive?" he asked. Sarah hesitated, then reached into the inner pocket of her coat and produced a slim, rubberized USB, its casing scuffed. She didn't hand it over. Not yet. Jack respected that. Trust earned itself in steps. A faint vibration hummed through the ground, too regular to be wind. Jack froze, head tilting, counting. Snowmobile? No. Engine pitch too low. Truck moving slow. Searching. He slid the USB back into Sarah's pocket and closed her coat with a firm, practiced motion. "We don't stop," he said. "We change direction." He took Buddy again, settling the puppy against his sternum, tucking the injured leg higher. Buddy's breathing synced, small chest rising and falling, as if reassured by the cadence. They angled downhill, crossing a frozen seep where ice glazed rock like glass. Sarah slipped. Jack caught her, forearm braced against her ribs, grip precise and impersonal. "Sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he said. "Just listen." He pointed with his chin. "Step where I step." She did, learning quickly, eyes sharp, fear tempered into focus. The trees thinned, revealing a long, pale stretch of snow where tracks would show like ink. Jack studied it, then shook his head. He led them sideways into brush, snapping dead twigs deliberately to create a false trail before doubling back, careful to let the wind erase what mattered. It was old work, muscle memory guiding him while his mind stayed quiet. The quiet was what scared him most. Quiet was where memories lived. They paused in a hollow that smelled faintly of resin and cold water. Jack checked Buddy's leg, pressing gently. The puppy didn't yelp. He licked Jack's glove, a warm, ridiculous gesture that struck deeper than any bullet. Jack closed his eyes for half a second, breathing through it. "He's tough," he said, more to himself than to Sarah. She nodded. "He's stubborn." A thin smile. "Like me." A shape moved at the edge of sight, a man, distant, bundled in a dark parka, beard heavy with frost, scanning with the patient posture of someone used to waiting. Jack registered details without staring: average height, stocky build, purposeful movements. Not local. He drew Sarah back with a hand signal and shifted their angle again, heart rate steady, choices stacking fast. "They won't call the police," he murmured. "Not in this weather. They'll finish it themselves." Sarah's face tightened, then steadied. "What do I do?" she asked. Jack met her eyes. "You do exactly what you're doing," he said. "You keep moving. You keep the drive safe. And you trust me long enough to get us past the next mile." He didn't promise safety. Promises were noise. He offered a plan, and that was better. As they slipped back into the shelter of the trees, the engine sound faded, replaced by the soft, relentless hush of falling snow. Jack set his course by instinct and consequence, carrying a puppy who breathed and a woman who refused to break. The truth she carried made her a target. The storm made them all ghosts. And Jack Turner, who had sworn never to lead anything that trusted him again, found himself doing exactly that, one careful step at a time. Night fell fast in the mountains, the kind of sudden darkness that swallowed landmarks and turned snow into a living wall. And somewhere behind them, an engine coughed to life, low and deliberate, confirming what Jack Turner already knew. They had been found. Jack felt it in his spine before he heard it again. Pursuit. Not panic-driven, not clumsy. These were men who understood patience. He changed direction immediately, angling away from the road and into dense timber where headlights became useless and sound fractured. His breath stayed controlled, shoulders loose, mind calculating distance, slope, and cover. Years as a Navy SEAL K-9 handler had taught him one thing above all else. Speed without stealth was a mistake that got people killed. Sarah followed as best she could, her movements slower now, but no less determined. She was tall and narrow-hipped, built more for endurance than strength, her long legs unsteady on uneven ground. Her dark chestnut hair had frozen stiff along the edges, framing a face pale with cold, but set in concentration. Fear still lived in her eyes, but it no longer ruled them. She had crossed into survival mode, the quiet, focused kind that stripped life down to the next step, then the one after that. Buddy limped beside her, favoring his injured hind leg. He was still small, all oversized paws and clumsy balance, but there was a sharp intelligence in the way his head tracked movement and sound. His ears, soft and half-folded, twitched constantly, catching vibrations long before human senses could. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He pressed close to Sarah's calf, using her as both shield and compass, his loyalty instinctive and absolute. Jack paused at the edge of a frozen creek, its surface a deceptive sheen of ice stretched thin over black water. He crouched, testing with the butt of a fallen branch. Solid enough, barely. "One at a time," he said under his breath, not looking back. Sarah nodded. She stepped where he stepped, boots sliding, arms windmilling once before she caught herself. Buddy followed, slipping, yelping once before clamping his jaw shut as if ashamed of the sound. Halfway across, ice cracked, not loud, but sharp. Jack's hand shot out, gripping Sarah's sleeve, pulling her forward as the surface sagged beneath her heel. Buddy scrambled, claws scraping uselessly, then skidded sideways, his injured leg plunging briefly into the freezing water. Jack lunged, catching the puppy by the scruff and hauling him free in one brutal motion. Buddy shook violently, water instantly icing his fur, but he stayed silent, eyes locked on Jack's face. They reached the far bank, breathless. Jack stripped off his outer layer without hesitation, wrapping it around Buddy, rubbing warmth back into the small body with firm, practiced strokes. His hands remembered this. Hypothermia drills, battlefield triage, dogs and men pulled back from the edge. Buddy trembled, then steadied, pressing his nose into Jack's wrist. The contact hit like a memory he hadn't invited. From the tree line behind them came voices, muffled, male, irritated. Jack caught fragments. Distance estimates, curse words, the metallic click of something being checked. Weapons. He scanned quickly and chose uphill, knowing pursuit burned faster climbing. He moved again, forcing pace without breaking rhythm, leaving false trails where the wind would scatter them, doubling back through brush to confuse even experienced trackers. One of the men emerged briefly into view, a broad-shouldered figure in a white camo jacket, beard dark and thick, eyes narrow with focus rather than rage. He moved like someone who had learned violence young and refined it over time. Jack clocked the posture instantly. Former military or paramilitary, disciplined, dangerous. This was not a smash-and-grab operation. They wanted the witness alive, or at least the drive she carried. Sarah stumbled again, this time dropping to one knee. Jack was beside her instantly, checking her ankle. Swollen, not broken yet. "I can keep going," she said, breath fogging, jaw tight. Jack met her gaze. "You will," he said quietly, not as command, but conviction. He shifted Buddy into her arms despite her protest, forcing warmth and responsibility together. "He stays with you." They found shelter beneath a stand of wind-fallen pines where snow drifted deep and sound died. Jack worked fast, hands numb but precise, carving a hollow piling snow for insulation, layering pine boughs for ground cover. It wasn't comfort. It was survival. Sarah sat with her back against the trunk, Buddy curled tight against her chest, his breathing shallow but steady. She whispered to him. Nonsense words, promises she didn't know how to keep. Jack crouched opposite them, rifleless, listening. He spoke softly to Buddy, not commands, not praise, just steady sound. "You're doing good," he murmured. "Stay with us." The words were for himself as much as the dog. In the hush, another face intruded on his mind, a larger shepherd, scarred muzzle, eyes fierce and loyal, collapsing under his hands years ago while extraction burned too far away. The pain was still there, but now it came with something else. Purpose. A shot cracked in the distance, sharp and probing, not aimed, testing. Jack stiffened, then exhaled. They were close, but not close enough. He leaned toward Sarah. "If they find us," he said, "you run. Follow the creek downstream. Don't look back." Sarah's eyes widened. "And you?" Jack didn't answer. He adjusted his position instead, placing himself between the trees and the hollow, shoulders squared, ready to become what he had once been. Minutes stretched. Snow fell heavier, erasing sound, erasing tracks, erasing certainty. The voices faded, then returned farther downslope, frustrated. Buddy shifted, letting out a tiny, breathy sound, more question than noise. Jack reached out and rested 2 fingers against the puppy's ribs, feeling the heartbeat there, fast but strong. "Quiet," he whispered, and Buddy obeyed, as if he had been trained all his life for that single word. When the night finally deepened and the hunters' voices slipped away with the storm, Jack allowed himself one slow breath. They had bought time, nothing more. In the white hell of the mountains, time was the rarest currency of all. He looked at Sarah, exhausted but unbroken, and at the small, stubborn life pressed against her heart. Tomorrow would be worse, but tonight they were still alive, and that was enough to keep moving. The storm loosened its grip just enough to become dangerous, the wind dropping while visibility sharpened, and in that brief mercy, Jack Turner knew the worst rule of mountains. When you can finally see, so can the people hunting you. Jack sensed it before the first crunch of boots, weight shifting wrong, snow disturbed where it shouldn't be. He eased his shoulders, scanning the hollow they had carved beneath the fallen pines. Sarah sat rigid, her back straight despite exhaustion, hazel eyes fixed on his face. Her cheeks were raw with cold, freckles stark against pale skin, dark hair braided clumsily now to keep it out of the wind. She looked older than she had hours ago, not from years, but from choice. Buddy lay pressed against her ribs, small chest rising faster than it should, injured leg tucked protectively inward. "They found us," Jack said quietly, not as a warning, but a fact. He rose without hurry, movements economical, the way men moved when they had already accepted the cost. His beard was stiff with frost, jaw set in the familiar line of decision. There were no teammates to consult, no radio chatter to hide behind. The years after losing his K-9 partner had stripped him down to this: judgment without backup. Jack scraped a boot deliberately across the snow, carving a trail that pointed uphill toward thicker timber, then crushed branches with his heel to make the lie convincing. He turned back to Sarah, eyes steady. "When I move, you wait 10 breaths," he said. "Then you go downhill. Follow the creek. Stay under cover." Sarah shook her head once, sharp and instinctive. "No." The word surprised them both. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. "I won't run blind." Jack held her gaze a moment longer than necessary. He saw what fear hadn't erased, Intelligence, resolve, a woman who understood consequences because she'd already paid some of them. "You won't," he said. "You'll move smart." He placed Buddy back into her arms, adjusting the jacket around the puppy. Buddy's ears twitched, sensing tension, dark eyes tracking Jack with unsettling focus. Jack stepped out first, drawing attention the way he once drew fire. He moved fast, deliberately careless, letting his weight announce itself, snapping branches, leaving a readable path. It was bait, and he knew it. Within seconds, voices followed, closer now, sharper. One of them laughed, a short, humorless sound. Another swore. Jack angled right, then doubled left, dropping low behind a rock outcrop where the ground fell away steeply. From her hiding place, Sarah counted breaths like he'd told her. Buddy shifted, restless, sensing separation. The woods felt smaller now, sound carrying too well. Then a boot slipped nearby, followed by a muttered curse. Buddy's body tensed, hackles lifting. Before Sarah could stop him, the puppy barked, a sharp, high sound that sliced the quiet open like glass. The response was immediate and panicked. A gunshot cracked, wild and uncontrolled, echoing off stone. Snow burst from a tree trunk inches from where the shooter stood, betraying his position. Shouts followed, angry, overlapping. The bark had done what Jack needed. It broke their discipline. Sarah's heart hammered as she realized what Buddy had just done, not bravely, but instinctively, the way frightened creatures sometimes saved lives without understanding how. Jack used the chaos. He surged forward from cover, tackling the nearest man hard into the snow. The man was heavy-set, mid-40s, beard braided tight against the cold, eyes wide with shock more than pain. Jack disarmed him with brutal efficiency, knee to wrist, elbow to jaw, years of muscle memory doing the work. He didn't linger. He vanished downslope as bullets punched snow behind him. Sarah heard Jack's movements, the controlled violence in them, and something in her snapped into place. Running without him felt wrong, not just dangerous, but incomplete. She pulled the USB from her coat, fingers numb, mind racing. The drive wasn't just data, it was leverage, and leverage, used at the right moment, could stop bloodshed. She moved, not away, but laterally, keeping low, using the creek's curve as cover until she spotted the leader. He stood apart, directing the others with curt hand signals, posture rigid, shoulders squared. He was leaner than the rest, late 30s maybe, face angular beneath a trimmed beard, eyes cold and assessing. This was a man who planned ahead, who hated improvisation because it meant loss of control. Sarah stepped into partial view, heart pounding so hard it hurt. "You want this?" she shouted, voice cracking but loud enough. She held the USB up, the small object absurdly fragile for the power it carried. The leader froze. His men faltered, eyes snapping between her and the trees. The moment stretched, fragile as ice. "Call them off," Sarah said, "or this goes public." Jack saw her then and felt something like fear slice through discipline. He moved anyway, using the leader's hesitation, closing distance fast. The leader recovered too late, reaching for his weapon. Jack hit him shoulder first, the impact tearing breath from both men. They rolled, snow and pain blurring together, until Jack felt the hot sting bloom across his side. A round had grazed him. He didn't slow. The leader went down hard, weapon skittering away. Jack pinned him, breath ragged now, blood soaking his jacket. Around them, the storm thinned, clouds lifting just enough to reveal the thump-thump of rotors approaching from the east. Jack fumbled inside his coat and triggered the emergency beacon he'd carried since his last deployment, a relic rarely trusted, but still alive. As the sound of the helicopter grew, the remaining men broke, scattering into the trees. Jack sagged to one knee, vision tunneling. Sarah reached him seconds later, dropping beside him, hands shaking as she pressed against the wound. Buddy wriggled free and scrambled over, licking Jack's chin, whining softly now that the danger had passed. Jack exhaled, long and slow. He had made a choice with no orders to follow, and for the first time in years, it felt like the right one. Spring came quietly to the mountains, not with warmth at first, but with light, thin sunlight that softened the snow's hard edges and reminded the valley that survival could become living again. Jack Turner woke to the steady beep of a monitor and the antiseptic calm of a small-town hospital room. He lay still for a moment, cataloging pain the way he always did. Sharp heat along his side where the bullet had torn through muscle, a deep ache in his ribs, stiffness everywhere else. He was alive. That mattered. The ceiling tiles were cracked and yellowed with age, and the window rattled faintly in the wind, but the quiet felt earned. For the first time in years, he did not wake bracing for loss. Sarah sat in the chair beside his bed, asleep with her chin tucked to her chest. In daylight she looked different, still slender and tall, still pale from the ordeal, but steadier now, as if fear had finally loosened its grip. Her dark chestnut hair was pulled into a simple knot at the nape of her neck, loose strands framing a face marked by exhaustion rather than terror. Her hands, folded in her lap, bore faint scrapes and bruises from ice and branches. She had the posture of someone who had learned to endure without collapsing, a woman shaped by quiet resolve instead of force. At her feet lay Buddy. The puppy's leg was wrapped neatly in white bandage, his fur brushed clean of dried ice and blood. He had gained weight in the short days since the storm, his ribs less visible now, eyes brighter. He lifted his head when Jack shifted, ears still floppy but alert, tail thumping softly against the floor in an unrestrained rhythm. There was nothing tactical about Buddy's joy. It was pure, immediate, unfiltered, and it unsettled Jack more than any memory of war. A nurse stepped in, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a practiced gentleness. She checked Jack's vitals, asked him to rate his pain, then nodded with quiet approval. "You're stubborn," she said, not unkindly. "That's why you're still here." Jack almost smiled. He had been called worse by better people. When she left, Sarah stirred, blinking awake, and their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Sarah let out a breath she had been holding for days and smiled, small, relieved, real. "They got them," she said softly. "All of them." She told him what he hadn't yet heard, the federal team that followed the beacon, the arrests that rippled outward from the mountains to offices and depots across the county, the supervisor who had ordered the backups now in custody. The crash that killed Tom Reyes was no longer an accident. The truth had teeth when it finally bit back. Sarah's voice did not shake as she spoke. Telling the story no longer felt like confession. It felt like closure. Jack listened without interruption. When she finished, he nodded once. "Witness protection," he said, more statement than question. Sarah nodded. "For a while." She glanced at Buddy, then back at Jack. They offered to place him with a foster. Her jaw set. "I said no." Jack felt something shift inside his chest. Not fear, not grief, but alignment. Some choices were not negotiable. Recovery took time. Jack learned patience again in measured steps, walking the corridor with a cane, breathing through pain, accepting help without mistaking it for weakness. Sarah visited every day, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in silence that no longer felt empty. Buddy learned the hospital rules quickly. No barking, no tugging at wires, no chewing the cane. He learned Jack's rhythms, too, resting when Jack rested, alert when Jack moved. It wasn't training. It was attunement. When Jack was discharged, the snow outside had thinned to dirty patches beneath trees, and the air smelled of wet earth. They drove to Jack's cabin on the ridge, the same place he had planned to leave behind before the storm rewrote his plans. The cabin was spare, wood, iron, tools neatly arranged, but sunlight poured through the windows now, catching dust motes like embers. Sarah set her bag down and exhaled, as if laying a burden on the floor. Buddy trotted the perimeter, nose busy, tail high, claiming the space with gentle certainty. The decision came quietly, without ceremony. Jack watched Buddy navigate the yard, testing snow crust with care, circling back when Sarah's ankle slowed her. He saw the instincts there, not aggression, not dominance, but focus, sensitivity, a drive to connect. He knelt despite the protest of his ribs and rested a hand on Buddy's chest, feeling the steady heartbeat. "Rescue," he said aloud, surprising himself. "Search, not combat." The words did not feel like compromise. They felt like truth. Training began with basics under the pale spring sun. Jack moved slowly, teaching Buddy to follow scent across damp ground, to pause and indicate rather than charge, to trust direction without losing curiosity. Buddy learned fast, clumsy at first, then sharper, tail wagging less wildly as concentration replaced excitement. Jack did not bark orders. He spoke in low tones, consistent and calm, building a language that relied on trust rather than force. It felt different from before. Better. Sarah watched from the porch, a blanket around her shoulders, her face relaxed in a way Jack had never seen. The future no longer felt like a narrowing tunnel. It felt open, if uncertain. She would testify when the time came. She would move, rebuild, decide who she wanted to be when fear no longer defined her days. Watching Jack and Buddy, she felt something unfamiliar bloom, safety not borrowed, but chosen. Weeks passed. Snow retreated to the high shadows. Grass pushed through. Buddy's bandage came off, leaving only a faint scar and a cautious respect for ice. Jack's wound healed into a long line along his side, a reminder without accusation. He added a simple patch to Buddy's harness, not a unit insignia, not a rank, just a symbol for search and rescue. Continuity without replacement, memory without paralysis. On a clear morning they walked the ridge together. The valley below glistened with meltwater, roads reappearing like veins beneath skin. Sarah stood a little apart, breathing in the cold, clean air, no longer scanning the trees for threats. Jack watched her, then Buddy, then the horizon. The life he had thought ended had simply changed direction. No orders had brought him here. Only choice. 3 lives had been pulled into a storm by a crime meant to stay hidden. They emerged not through violence, but through courage that refused to look away, and decisions made when no one else could make them. Jack clipped the leash, Buddy sat, steady, ready. And Sarah smiled from the porch. In the thin spring light, the mountain felt like possibility. Not because the past had been erased, but because it had finally been answered. Sometimes life doesn't warn us before the storm hits. It doesn't ask if we're ready. It simply tests who we choose to be when fear, exhaustion, and loss surround us. Jack didn't win because he was stronger than everyone else. Sarah survived not because she was fearless, and Buddy wasn't a hero because he was trained. They made it through because when it mattered most, they chose courage over comfort, responsibility over escape, and compassion over indifference. In everyday life, we face smaller storms, moments when it's easier to look away, stay silent, or walk past someone who needs help. This story reminds us that real strength often shows up quietly, in staying when it's easier to leave, in protecting what's vulnerable, and in making the right choice, even when no one is watching. You don't have to be a Navy SEAL to save a life. Sometimes, saving a life starts with listening, caring, or simply refusing to turn your back. If this story moved you, let it move you to action. Share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment and tell us what this story made you feel or who it reminded you of. And if you want more stories about courage, loyalty, and hope in the darkest moments, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Your support helps these stories reach others who may need them most.